Hello, welcome to December's Focus on Local History. It's our slightly longer program. It used to be a full hour, but this is video now and nobody wants that, so we'll try to keep it brief. December's topic is Charles Stribley, who, if you know the name, it's probably because you know his house on Wisconsin Avenue, which we'll get to. I don't know if you can see this. This young man down here is a young Charles Stribley when he worked for the Telegraph. See that okay? Mm-hmm. All right, and one more. This is the slightly older Charles Stribley when he was an executive at the mill. So rather than take those out when I get to that, see him right away. All right, so Charles Stribley. He was born in Indiana. As is pretty common, a lot of the big names in early Kaukauna history were not born in Kaukauna. They came from Indiana, New York, Vermont, other places out east, because it's a young city. Not too many people were actually born here yet. Unlike today, where I think most people probably were born here, or Appleton technically. But so he came in from Indiana. Again, as a young man, he was a telegraph operator. He learned that in Madison. He thought that's what he was going to do with his life, but he shifted gears partway through and he became a bookkeeper for Oscar Tilmany. And I'll say Tilmany with the solid T. When I refer to the mill, I refer to it as Thilmany's. Now, we can dispute that, but for the sake of this, we'll say that Tilmany is the man and Thilmany's is the mill. That's a whole other conversation I don't want to get into. But he started working as a bookkeeper for Oscar Tilmany. Now, around 1905, Mr. Tilmany packed up. He decided things weren't working out the way he wanted to, and he moved back to Germany. So he sort of abandoned his mill. I don't know that this was the right decision, but he did, and he named his successors. And one of those successors was Charles Stribley, his bookkeeper, which was an amazing opportunity for Stribley because he was not a huge financial giant by any means. I mean, he was a fairly modest man. His family was a hardworking family. They became sort of notable in the Civil War. Both his father and his uncle were distinguished soldiers in the Civil War. Their family today still has a sash or a scarf that Stribley's uncle wore in the war, and it's got blood stains on it, which is kind of gross, but they still have it to this day. But yeah, they weren't like huge, successful people in their usual sense. But Charles Stribley kind of became that through his time at the mill. He grew it into the successful business that it became known as, and he became quite wealthy. He married into the Lehman family, and the Lehman family today probably isn't very well known, but they were sort of a bigger family, more successful family from Appleton, originally from Hustisford, which is in Dodge County. But they settled in Appleton, and they owned property along the river by what's now Lutz Park. If you know Lutz Park, it's right off Pierce Park. It's where the yacht club in Appleton is. So they owned the strip of land over there. They had their own boat launch there that was very popular. So a somewhat notable family in the area. But Emma Lehman and Charles Stribley, when they were married, they never had children of their own. I don't know why. I don't know if they couldn't or if they chose not to, but for whatever reason, they didn't. But they were very successful, and they built the mansion at 705 Wisconsin Avenue. It's still there today. It's debatably the nicest house on the stretch of land, debatably the nicest house in the whole city. I would say it probably is. It's rather large. I won't get into the architecture of it. We had a walking tour earlier this year where we talked about that, and I can get that information if somebody wants it. But really nice house, and really one of the early examples of electricity in a house. I don't know if I have the numbers in front of me. Okay, I'm not going to try to find the numbers, but hundreds and hundreds of lights were in there, and it was a pretty big deal at the time because electricity was sort of a new thing. But this area was known for electricity. Obviously, we had the hydroelectric power, which got Kaukauna the name, the Electric City, and nearby Appleton had the Hearthstone, which was, well, still is, but was a house that was powered by hydroelectric power, so it was kind of a big deal around here. He retired and he moved down to Florida, where he built another massive house. In fact, possibly even nicer than the Kaukauna house, and again, it still stands today. And his neighbors were Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. So there's pictures of him hanging out with his neighbors, Edison and Ford. His wife was a member of the Garden Club, so she was gardening with the wives of Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, like you do. And, you know, it was, even though of those three names, obviously Stribley is the least famous, in his day, he was just kind of as big of a deal. He was just as wealthy or successful. He didn't have that lasting impact because he wasn't a major inventor, but still, we had our own little bit of a giant there in town. When they passed, again, they had no children, so their property went to their niece, who had married Alphonse Lang, who commonly went by A.M. Lang, or his friends called him Allie Lang. He ran the local jewelry store. So he was successful in his own right as a local jewelry store owner. And people may recall him because he started the tradition of giving out the Lang Trophy each year, which goes to a Kaukauna high school student. A very successful high school student gets this award. So yeah, they ended up inheriting this mansion on Wisconsin Avenue, which was a little beyond probably what they needed, but they moved there. And eventually they disposed of it, and it went on next to an oil executive. And today the Zwicker family, who you may know from the Zwicker knitting mills, lives there. So it's been passed on. It's out of the family at this point. The Langs lived there for some time. Like I said, they had the jewelry business. Their son was Robert Lang, and Robert Lang was, I want to say, an insurance person, but I don't want to misspeak. Okay, well, we'll just go with that. And but anyway, but he became really notable early on in life through his time in the military. He came up through World War II and was distinguished in World War II. He was already distinguished even before he went off to war. He was a very charismatic gentleman. He was in the ROTC at UW-Madison, and was named like top of his class there, very successful. So yeah, by the time he went to war and came back to Kaukauna, he was already pretty well known. His son, David Lang, possibly even exceeded his father, and he ended up working sort of in government intelligence, military intelligence. He knew several languages. I mean, the list of languages he knew is ridiculously impressive. He started out young in the Boy Scouts, worked his way up to Eagle Scout, and was just that sort of hardworking young man, wanted to keep going at his studies and made something of himself. So he unfortunately passed away young. He's no longer with us, but the Lang family has, well, first the Stribleys, but then their descendants, the Lang family, has kind of lived on and become notable here in town. I'm rambling quite a bit, but that generally covers it. If anybody has any specific questions, I have notes. I'm happy to answer them. And if they're not in my notes, I'll find those answers for you. So feel free to reach out, and that's December's Local History Focus.